Alrighty, we're out on our big Aussie beer voyage for the year, where we get outside of Brisbane. I bet you can't guess where we are.
Sydney.
Oh. Let's go get some beers.
ABV is proudly sponsored by Convoy, Bintani, Craft Punks Canning and Rallings, labels and stickers. It was an early start to day one of our Sydney beer voyage. With a pre-dawn crawl to the airport and some cheeky Maccas secured, it was time to board our Brisbane to Sydney flight. For the fellow ab geeks out there, we were lucky enough to end up on one of Jetstar's Airbus A321neo aircraft, featuring new, quieter and more efficient engines than a regular A321, a fact that Adzi of course found thrilling. And he was just as overjoyed as me to be popping our A321neo cherry together. It wasn't long before we swapped the Brisbane skyline for the Sydney one, with Adzi basking in the glory of flight as we landed onto runway 34 right. From our plane, we headed to a train, dropped our bags at the hotel, then proceeded via the rather fancy metro line to Rouse Hill, home to both an upside-down house and, more interestingly for us, Esker Beer Co. You'll find Esker Beer Co. at home in the Australian Hotel and Brewery, just a few minute drive away from the metro station. The Esker brand has been around for a few years now, with the team producing some fantastic tasting beers in this nicely appointed brewery and venue. A venue that's all too familiar for Adzi, having started his path into the world of craft brewing doing work experience here 5 years ago, just before COVID put the world on hold. He was keen to get back, and rightly so, with Charlie taking us on a tour around the brewery side of things, before we sat down for a chat with Jamie joining in for some beers too.
The history of the hills, the recent history is around fruit growing, particularly oranges and mandarins. And so we've done a citrus gosa with mandarin and orange as the fruit. But from the branding point of view, it's when we talk about how we want it to go local, it as our sort of signature product ties into that idea around the farming history, the fruit growing history of the area.
We managed to work our way through most of the core range, along with a very special treat in the form of some Realm of Dragons barrel-aged Imperial Red Ale. This 12.1% stonker was a delightful sipper and definitely one of the best beers I've had so far this year. Just a shame there was only a few cans left of this beast, and a couple less than that after we left. By this point, we'd earned some lunch, so got stuck into some of their fine grub before heading back to the city and calling it a night. Rise and shine for day 2 of the trip, and after taking in the scenic hotel views, we jumped on a tram and made our way to Circular Quay. Today, we'd be taking the ferry over to Manly to soak up the local beer scene just to the north of Sydney. After arriving into Manly, we had some time to kill until the first beer stop opened, so we took in the beachside views and watched the local wildlife frolic. Once 11 AM struck, we headed into a location that had us seeing deja vu. We're used to seeing Felons brewing back home in Brisbane, under the Story Bridge, but the concept certainly works just as well when perched on a beachside pier too. This relatively new venue sits in the perfect spot to soak up some beers, our first one being the Japanese Rice Lager, brewed exclusively for their new Manly home. Not only was this a cracking beer, but each one sold supports a charity called Sea Bin that removes one piece of plastic from Sydney Harbour for every lager sold. Not a rubbish idea. After that, it was time for a quick paddle of their limited release beers, before heading across the road to sink a small batch ESB at 4 Pines. You know, just to say I've actually been there. A short Uber ride later, and we made our way to Brookvale, a suburb that's absolutely packed with craft breweries. We randomly chose Freshwater Brewing as our first stop, and it was a great way to kick things off. Not only did they have a cool range of beers available on tap, but the venue had some great chilled vibes as well. Their chicken schnitty was also very on point. And with this fuel in the belly, Adzi was ready for a chat. Thankfully, head brewer Brett was happy to oblige.
The whole brand and ethos of the beer kind of comes from the beach itself and the community around that kind of beach, Northern Beaches kind of Sydney lifestyle. So that's what we kind of focus on in terms of our hospitality offering here, and also the beers that we make, being that kind of majority of the sessionable beer that you can have at the beach, at the park, before the footy, that kind of thing.
We could have chatted and enjoyed these beers all day, but we figured we should probably try out some other breweries too. Quite literally around the block, we found Esker Brewing Co, a charming little venue with a local cult following. We also found Emma behind the bar, who seemed to be just as full of energy and ready to chat as Adzi was, so naturally sat down to record some of that for our full Manly and Brookvale episode in the coming weeks. After managing to pull Adzi away from what could have been a never-ending chat, we hit the pavement once again, this time stopping at Nomad Brewing. By this time it was getting dark, and so were the tasting paddles we ended up going with. We settled into the evening with a range of different stouts, all hitting the spot, before deciding to head to one final brewery for the evening. After a short walk, we completed a loop back to Seventh Day Brewery, which was just across the road from where we had started earlier at Freshwater. Here, we polished off some final tasty beers and a bit of pizza for dinner before finally calling it a night and taking an Uber back to the hotel, since the ferries had stopped by this point. For day 3, it was time to venture into the well-known Marrickville area, a must-visit spot for all craft beer geeks when down in Sydney. It's also pretty fantastic if you're a plain nerd as well. With a heap of breweries and bars to choose from, we had 2 interviews lined up for the day. We kicked things off at Mixtape Brewing and Bar, where we chatted to Jason about the on-site brewing setup that pumps out a great selection of small batch beers for the venue. Most of the beers on tap at the time of our visit happened to be Star Wars themed, a product of their recent Star Wars Day celebrations.
You brewed up for May the 4th for Star Wars Day. So all of these beers, do you try and do the same beers like next year, or just do a different wedge of like the same sort of style, or is it like this thing where you're just trying to nail it?
It's a bit of both. I'm trying to nail that one still. Last year it went purple, and so we made a purple lightsaber.
Yep.
So I made a different beer.
We also suspect that Jason's a bit of a fan of this galaxy far, far away in general, going by the decor. And who can blame him? How good are some AT-ATs on a shelf? With some chit-chat done, a blue lightsaber beer enjoyed, and a token low-flying aircraft image secured, we had some time to kill before our next interview in the area. This mission was accomplished by stopping in for a quick pot at the Bob Hawke Beer and Leisure Centre. I'd like to say we sculled a schooner to want a bob, but Adzi wasn't feeling up to it. Our next interview was just around the corner at one of the most well-known Marrickville haunts, Batch Brewing. Their head brewer Nick was more than happy to give us a tour of the brewery before sitting down for a chat afterwards.
As soon as I finished uni, I was on the hunt for jobs around Sydney. It was around 2020, so it was all pretty quiet and uncertain with COVID. But yeah, I sprayed out emails to everyone in Sydney, and Andrew got me in for an interview. Which was good, and the rest is history. I've been here since then.
We couldn't help but enjoy a few more beers after our chat with Nick, before taking a stroll up the road to Philter Brewing to finish the day with a couple of dark ales. Our 4th day began with some non-beer leisure time. I decided to pop out to the headlands to grab some footage of the USS America arriving into Sydney Harbour, because, well, it looked cool. Adzi, meanwhile, went for a stroll in Darling Harbour and probably had a beer. But it wasn't long before we were heading back into Marrickville. Again, with some time to spare before our final interview of the trip, we stopped in at Esker Brewing and Kicks Brewing to check out some of their wares. Safe to say, they were both very solid. After this, we made our way to Philter Brewing for an interview with head brewer Max. Adsy's been very keen on this chat for a long time, and with Max's big personality and even bigger brewery setup, it was the perfect way to wrap up our interviews in Sydney.
I thought I wanted to do something, some trade not everyone does. Yeah. Not that there's anything wrong with a normal trade, but I just wanted to do something, okay, not as usual. Yeah.
So with this final chat in the bag, there was only one way to wrap things up, with some beers. The final day of the voyage was a short and simple one. We wandered out to the Opera House for some token tourist shots, then aimlessly meandered around some more of Sydney. After this, we realised we could get an earlier flight home, so made the dash to the airport, got our early flight delayed anyway by a thunderstorm, before eventually lifting off on a Qantas Boeing 737-800, bound for Brisbane. And with that, our Sydney voyage came to an end. It was a great trip, and we would have loved to have chatted with even more breweries while there, but turns out it's pretty hard to pin down everyone you want to speak with in a set number of days. Maybe we'll just have to voyage back there again soon. It's certainly worth the trip.